So let's talk for just a few minutes about the late Colin Powell, first black Secretary of State, weapons of mass destruction, helping Barack Obama get elected, and saying in recent years, and I quote, "Donald Trump is a liar who skirts the Constitution," close quote. Let's take just a few minutes to talk about the complicated life and legacy of Colin Powell, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So Colin Powell just passed away. General Colin Powell, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, Secretary of State, Colin Powell, husband, father, grandfather, Colin Powell. I want to share with you one quote by Colin Powell that I have used many times over the years. But first, let me acknowledge that the very name Colin Powell conjures up for many people the thought of just three letters, WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. And I want to take that on toward the end of this short video. But first, let's look at a little bit of today's reporting about Colin Powell passing. Headline from CNN, Colin Powell, military leader and first black U.S. Secretary of State, dies after complications from COVID-19. The article begins, Colin Powell, the first black U.S. Secretary of State, whose leadership in several Republican administrations helped shape American foreign policy in the last years of the 20th century and the early years of the 21st, has died from complications from COVID-19. So friends, if you'll indulge me a quick story about a Colin Powell quote that I used countless times over the years, and I would use it when, toward the end of my time with the U.S. Army, active duty with the JAG Corps, when I was supervising other Army lawyers. And then when I moved over to the Department of Justice and ultimately I supervised federal prosecutors as the chief of the homicide section, I would always say the same thing when I had new lawyers come to my section. I would begin supervising them. I quoted Colin Powell, and I would put on my best command voice and appear as stern as I could. And I would say, if I come to your office at 6:30 at night and you are not at your desk, I will consider you to be a wise person indeed. Now, yes, that was probably paraphrasing slightly, something that Colin Powell said to the State Department employees in his inaugural address to them after he was confirmed as Secretary of State. He was somebody who understood the importance of the work-life balance. And by all accounts, he really insisted that anybody he supervised took time for themselves, for their friends, for their families. And didn't spend too much time at work, because life is not just about work. And that was the quote that I always used to try to demonstrate the importance and the value of a work-life balance. And before turning to the topic of weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, let's take a look at some of what Colin Powell said and did later in his life, in the more recent years. So for example, this from CNN, later in his public life, Powell would grow disillusioned with the Republican Party's rightward lurch and would use his political capital to help elect Democrats to the White House, most notably Barack Obama, the first black president whom Powell endorsed in the final weeks of the 2008 campaign. Or this from NBC News, Colin Powell calls Trump a liar, says he skirts the Constitution, will vote for Biden. Or this, when Colin Powell was asked on CNN how he now felt about the claim that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and about the ill-advised war in Iraq, Here's what Colin Powell said. I regret it now because the information was wrong. Of course, Colin Powell went on later in life to devote himself to many valuable, worthy, important causes, not just fighting against the lawlessness and unconstitutionality of Donald Trump, who he is, what he does. Some might say that Colin Powell tried to put right some of what he got wrong earlier in life, some of what he got wrong by his own admission. And one of the things he got wrong, weapons of mass destruction, was dramatic and devastating. Now, I don't claim to be a military expert. I do certainly have my own views on the power and the danger of catering to the military-industrial complex. I don't claim to be an expert on our national intelligence communities, but I have some friends who are and who retired from the CIA and other intelligence agencies, and they've shared with me pretty candidly some of our nation's intelligence assessment practices. Now, I can't say definitively if or how Colin Powell may have been led astray in his assessments, his positions, his conclusions about weapons of mass destruction, though I have my suspicions. What I will say is that no career public servant should be judged by their worst day or by their worst decision. The way I see it, Colin Powell served our nation faithfully and honorably, even if imperfectly. Imperfectly, as we all do, myself included. Anybody who dedicates their career to public service will serve imperfectly. But most serve honorably and faithfully. So rest in peace, General Powell, Chairman Powell, Secretary Powell, Colin Powell. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.